Good evening, and thank you for your attendance here this evening. I am Deputy Mayor Vicky Mink, and I will be chairing this public meeting tonight. I'm joined by staff and members of council. Tonight I have with me Councillor Adam Pearson, Mayor Olena Henkivsky, Councillor Claire Holloway-Wadwani, Councillor Todd Attridge, and Councillor Les Andrews. I'd like to begin, as we always do, with a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. And now I'd like to read our Indigenous Land Acknowledgement Statement. The municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga and Anishinaabeg traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as right holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration of Rights on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Now I'd like to ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest from members of council, and I'd like to note that there were none received in advance. And I'm seeing none. We're here tonight for a public meeting that is held in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. This meeting is a prescribed requirement under the Act and represents only one component of the planning and development process. Please note that no decisions will be made at tonight's meeting. The format of today's public meeting is as follows. Municipal staff will provide an overview of the report, policy framework, and technical review and public consultation. Council members may ask questions of staff or provide comments at this time. Finally, members of the public who wish to provide input will be able to do so by coming up to the podium. Alternatively, you can also provide input via written submission to planning@porthope.ca. Please note, as the chair, I may call on the applicant or staff to provide clarification on matters raised by members of the public. I'd like to note that there are sign-in sheets near the entrance, right over there. If you want to be notified when a notice of discussion is issued, please ensure you fill out the sign-in sheets with your information. It is now time to commence our public meeting for this evening. This is regarding a proposed zoning bylaw amendment, file ZB06-25. This is a municipality-initiated zoning bylaw amendment intended to implement new innovative housing definitions as well as amend existing zoning provisions to allow for more flexible housing development. I would like to note that council members are not here tonight to express their opinions for or against the proposed changes. The time for that will come when the matter is brought forward for consideration at a future meeting of the Committee of the Whole. And I'm going to ask planning staff to please make their presentation and introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair Mink. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Thank you for having me this evening. As mentioned, tonight I'm presenting zoning bylaw amendment file number ZB06-25, which we are calling our housing and additional residential unit zoning bylaw update. My name is Ken Scullion. I'm a senior planner with the municipality. Okay, so some background on the zoning bylaw amendment application. So this zoning bylaw amendment application is a municipality-initiated zoning bylaw amendment. The zoning bylaw amendment is a result of the August 1st, 2023 council direction to staff to explore alternative and affordable housing options within the municipality. The purpose of this amendment is to more easily permit the development of housing within Port Hope. So there are two key components of this zoning bylaw amendment application. The first being amendments to definitions relative to dwelling and dwelling unit types, including a new definition for tiny homes and dwelling and the concept of dwellings. And the second being amendments to existing additional residential unit provisions. So two components, definitions and provisions. And I'm going to get into both components of the ZBA in the following slides. So starting out with the first component, which is definitions. So through the amendments to the definition section of our zoning bylaw, we have introduced a definition of tiny home as well as a definition for a dwelling. There's also been some general housekeeping amendments to the definition, and all these amendments to definitions are outlined within the key document proposed definitions, which was circulated in support of the zoning bylaw amendment application. So I'm going to get into the two new concepts or two new defined terms that are listed in this slide and the following slide. Okay, so a dwelling has been introduced, and the intent of introducing this, this new term is to do exactly what we see in the definition of tiny home there. We place that word dwelling, which we then can apply to the term, in this instance, a tiny house. So a dwelling unit will share common characteristics as outlined within the definition. So the definition is a building containing one or more dwelling units constructed on-site or off-site and parts designed to be transported to a lot where they are joined integral parts and placed on a permanent foundation over a concrete slab or basement. So in the instance we look at a tiny house, the definition is right there. We understand that a tiny house is designed to be portable, but when we apply the term dwelling to tiny house, we know that it is constructed of parts put together on-site or off-site, and they are joined in integral units and placed on a permanent foundation. So moving on to the term tiny home or tiny house, we've introduced that so we can apply in our zoning bylaw and we can permit that use. The tiny house is defined there as a right in certain zones. Okay, so, sorry, I'm going to go back to this one slide. Oh. And one thing I do want to touch on, and that became known to me today, is that we do need to remove the definition of tiny home. We do need to remove the words a dwelling unit in. Tiny home is just a dwelling that is designed to be portable and provide permanent living accommodation. That became known to me today, and that is something we are going to revise and move forward with. Okay, so the second key component of this zoning bylaw amendment is amendments to existing provisions. They are intended to more easily permit development of housing through amended ARU provisions, and these include greater permitted bedroom count, lot coverage, floor area, height, and reduced parking rates. And I'm going to get into some of these concepts in the following slides. We've also introduced a new provision that would allow for tiny homes and modular homes to be permitted as of right as a primary dwelling. And that provision is listed within the amending provisions document, the key document that is supporting the zoning bylaw amendment application. Okay, so as mentioned, tiny homes and modular homes may be permitted as primary units on a given lot. These would allow for obtainable and affordable housing options. And as mentioned, these have been proposed through a new tiny home definition. And the bottom left there is a typical tiny home. And on the right is actually a modular home in the form of a single detached dwelling. Okay, and we were also proposed reduced parking rates for ARU development. So currently, single detached dwellings require 2 parking spaces. One new ARU requires 1 parking space, and the second will require another parking space to a total of 4. So through the proposed provision, we are saying that where less than 2 parking spaces are provided on a lot, only 1 parking spot is required for the ARU. Where 2 parking spaces are provided on the lot, no additional parking space are required for the first or second ARU. So on that image on the bottom right, we can see a constrained lot with insufficient lot frontage and lot area, which provides a disadvantage for that landowner because they're unable to develop an ARU as of right, and we're hoping that through reducing parking rate requirements, it's going to become more feasible to develop additional residential units on a lot. Okay, so we're also considering permitting more bedrooms in an ARU. Currently, we only allow a maximum of 2 bedrooms. And the proposed ZBA would allow for 3. So in the images on the slide, we can see this is a dwelling with the exact same floor area, except we've placed a 3rd bedroom in a common area. And of course, when there's more bedrooms, more people are able to inhabit a dwelling unit. Okay. So before I get into this one, I would like to say that this slide applies specifically to detached additional residential units. It does not discuss attached additional residential units. Section 4.2.1.2 of our zoning bylaw requires that dwelling unit or additional residential units that are attached to the primary dwelling or in the same building as the primary building. There's a cap of 50% of the primary building. For example, if you have a primary dwelling unit with 1,000 square feet, the maximum for that additional residential unit could be 500 square feet. And we have not proposed to change that provision. So this applies strictly to detached ARUs. So currently a single ARU or a second ARU may match 50% of the floor area of the primary dwelling singularly or accumulatively to a maximum of 70 square meters for residential zones and 80 square meters for countryside zones. So residential zones we typically see in urban areas, typically smaller lot area, lot frontage, and so smaller ARUs, generally speaking. And in countryside zones, 80 square meters, slightly greater ARU gross floor area permission for countryside zones. So the proposed ZBA would allow for a greater of the gross floor area of the primary dwelling unit, or 70 square meters for residential zones, or 80 square meters for countryside zones for both ARUs, so not accumulatively. So that would result in greater gross floor area permission. Within residential zones, we've also have a lot coverage requirement, which if a detached ARU is in a rear yard, it cannot exceed 50% of that rear yard, but only if the lot coverage exceeds 45% of the entire lot. And we actually landed on that 45% in accordance with, I believe it was OREG 462-24, which is a provincial regulation for additional residential units throughout the province. Okay. Lot coverage is something else we're taking a look at. Currently, detached ARUs may cover 10% of the lot in residential zones and 5% of the lot for countryside zones, including detached accessory structures. So the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would permit detached accessory structures to cover 15% of the lot and 10% of lots, depending on if they're on residential or countryside, or urban residential, countryside, and residential zones, if a detached accessory structure contains an additional residential unit. Okay, and we're also considering greater height. Currently, ARUs are only permitted to go up to 5 meters in height. The proposed ZBA would allow for detached ARUs to be up to 7.5 meters in residential zones and 9 meters in countryside zones. If an ARU exceeds 5 meters in height, the setback for the primary dwelling would apply. So for example, if someone proposes a detached additional residential unit, 7.5 meters, the applicable setback would be for the primary structure. I know that in some hamlet residential zones, the setback for ARUs is 1.2 meters, whereas if they went above 5 meters, we're going to apply it would be 7.5 meters for that particular zone. Okay, moving on to public consultation. So the Planning Act tools we used for this application was resident mailouts for those who requested notice. Non-statutory tools were notices on our municipal website and the Port Hope Engage website, which we've been updating since the inception of this ZBA. Notice of public meeting was issued on November 20th, 2025, and we did have a public open house, which I did discuss within the staff report and came up with some great ideas to move forward with, and that occurred on September 25th, 2025. Okay, and I will state before getting into this slide that we have circulated to staff and agencies as part of this zoning bylaw amendment application. Staff and agencies review zoning bylaw amendment applications and provide comments accordingly. We have not yet received any comments, and some are going to help guide the zoning bylaw amendments. So when we do come back with a recommendation report, we are going to be considering comments from staff and agencies, notably the building department, engineering department, Ganarask Region Conservation Authority, et cetera. So as I stated, staff will address public and agency comments. Staff will prepare a recommendation report based on policy, consistency, and conformity. Consider all comments received from the public as well as council. We then prepare a recommendation report, which is reviewed at the committee of the whole to decide if the application should proceed to the council meeting for a final decision, and then to a council meeting for a decision, and if approved, a notice of decision is given, starting an appeal period of 20 days. Thank you. As I said, my name is Ken Scully, and I'm a senior planner with the municipality. My email address is there as well as phone number. Anyone would like to contact me, questions, comments, it's very welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken, for that presentation. So now I'll ask council if there are any questions, and I already see Councillor Andrews with his hand up.
Thank you. Why do we tie tiny homes to portability as opposed to build on site?
Yeah, through the chair. So our definition of tiny homes, it states they are designed to be portable. However, when we apply that the definition of dwelling, it actually needs to be affixed to a permanent foundation as it stands at this point in the zoning bylaw amendment application. So it might sound a bit odd, even though they're designed to be portable, they would be affixed permanently in accordance with the Ontario Building Code.
Because according to the height restriction of 7.5 meters, you would never be able to get it to the site or move it from the site because the bridges are only 4.15 meters in height.
Yeah, through the chair. So tiny homes are not the only way to build ARUs. It is just an option for landowners. It's not necessarily tied to tiny homes. It could be what we would just consider a typical additional residential unit, which is a approximately 800 square foot brick building that's a smaller single family home.
Okay, and I'll just continue to go around. So Councillor Todd.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciating the fact that you still have to get other agencies to weigh in. One of the questions I have for you is, in one of the definitions under dwelling, requires a permanent foundation over a concrete slab or basement. I'm curious whether, if we change that language to a permanent foundation meeting the Ontario Building Code, would that be equally enforceable? And I'm thinking of properties like 20 Barrett Street, which is known locally as the Lift House, which is built on stilts, because if we can change that so that people can use piers or helical piles and so on, that would be a game changer for people who want to build in the floodplain. Yes. So I'm just curious as to how we can address some of that.
Yep, and as you mentioned, we are going to circulate to the building department who will comment on those provisions and definitions, and that is something we'll consider, and that's an excellent point, and I will actually bring that up to our chief building official for his consideration.
Appreciate that. I just want to make sure that they're not just commenting on the report, because they won't think necessarily to go, oh, what else could be there? So it may be something that we need to nudge along and get them there, because I don't know if they'll necessarily look for the white space there. They're going to look whether or not what we have is a viable solution or not.
Yep. That is noted, and I'll ensure that our chief building official gets that information.
Councillor Claire.
Okay, so I guess I'll stick with the definitions piece for my first question as well. So I think there were a number of places where there are specific exclusions listed in the proposed new wording for things that will not including X, Y, and Z, and then other places as well that seem to be repetition of provisions that are already in the Ontario Building Code. So I wondered from a simplicity perspective, whether it would be more prudent to simply use the language, you know, a tiny home is a dwelling such and such that meets the Ontario Building Code. Because that way too, if there's changes to the Ontario Building Code over the years, we're not then having to go back and update our zoning bylaw accordingly.
Through the chair, that is another excellent point, and that is something that will run by the chief building official.
And Mayor, go ahead.
I might be going a little bit broader, but I'd like to put some things on the table. So we're doing one question at a time and then circulating around. So my first question is just going to be around the number of ARUs that we currently allow. I realize that this is more than just a definitional question, but understanding that we do see some jurisdictions that are allowing up to 4 ARUs, and it really is dependent on particular lots and their characteristics. I want to know whether or not there's enough flexibility in what is being proposed in terms of the floor areas, in terms of the maximum square meters, all of those kinds of metrics to grow in the possibility of having more ARUs than we're currently contemplating. I don't want to be hemmed in by that, and I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
Sure, yeah, through the chair. So our official plan permits up to 2 additional residential units in addition to the primary dwelling unit for a total up to 3 units on a property. In order for that to happen, to have more than 2 additional residential units on a property, we need to amend our official plan to have that permission, and then amend our zoning bylaw to reflect that official plan permission. So at this time, in short, we're not able to right now, but I will note that the municipality will be going through a official plan update in the future, and that is something that we can do a policy review on and implement policy accordingly.
So just a quick follow-up, and I understand it's a chicken and egg thing, but I'm also just wondering whether we can keep the language as flexible as possible to ensure that we don't have to go back and make a lot of changes in terms of some of the limitations being placed on maybe floor areas or maximum, square meters, as long as we're not in violation of the Ontario Building Code.
Yep, that's an interesting idea, and that's something we'll consider as we move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Adam.
How about now? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So great presentation first. So I want to thank you for that. I have a question. It's a little bit off of the ARU, but it is still, and it's more about farm help, as there is seasonal farm help as well, and there's different provisions for the seasonal farm help than what a typical ARU is. And I guess it kind of in a way goes to what Councillor Clare was saying as well, as the Ontario Building Code changes, maybe there is an opportunity for different definitions on these tiny homes or ARUs and everything. Could you just help me with what is allowed for farm help ARUs and the temporary seasonal farm help?
Yeah, through the chair. So farm help is a completely separate discussion from additional residential units. Farm help can be incorporated into a property in addition to additional residential units, but our zoning bylaw and official plan both have specific policies and provisions for farm help. A unique example is that farm help can occur in a mobile home as per our official plan, but there's zoning provisions that are in effect as well that needs to be upheld when someone is trying to develop farm help on their property.
Okay, so I too have a number of questions, so I'll ask my one and then we'll go back around. When you gave the definition of tiny homes, it said not a mobile home. And so I just had a question about that, because all our surrounding municipalities have 4-season winterized mobile homes. We have some up there on Telephone on Telephone Road, where there's a whole subdivision of them. So would a winterized mobile home fall under that definition of a tiny home or not?
Currently, as the definition is written, no, it would not.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, this wasn't my question, but why? Like, why don't we have that?
Yeah, it's something that we've had discussions on, and at this time, we didn't find it appropriate to incorporate those zoning permissions. That is something that Mr. Deloitte and I had a lot of discussions on, and I think Mr. Deloitte has joined us tonight. If I'm not sure if he's able to.
So, Madam Chair, we've had some discussions about going as far as mobile homes. We don't see mobile homes as equivalent to ARUs. Mobile homes have very different development aspects in terms of how they're sited, how they're skirted, how they're roofed, how they're serviced, that kind of thing. And so our advice to this council is not to consider mobile homes an ARU. At this point, there are some experiments going on, but I think we strongly recommend we not go as far as mobile homes being permitted in the urban and rural areas throughout as an ARU. I think it's as simple as that. We are promoting and updating our bylaw to, and possibly the official plan through the further review next year, other housing types, but not as far as mobile homes because they have their own development requirements.
Thank you for that, Leo. And we have a follow-up. So this is not Councillor Claire's question. This is her follow-up on this topic.
Yeah, I'm going to probe on that just a little bit further because we explicitly included trailers and all other alternative housing types in the original council motion. So I'm not understanding if council's direction was we want those things included. I'm not understanding why, because they have different development requirements, why they're being excluded from this process. If the community has said they are wanted and council has said they are wanted, I'm confused at the rationale for their exclusion at this point.
So if I may, Madam Chair, from a planning standpoint, mobile homes, mobile home parks are very different kinds of communities and have their own development standards. We are aware that council was asking us to look at mobile homes, and we did, and we've had, as was indicated by the senior planner, a number of discussions, and we think that's a standard that should not be adopted as part of the ARU recommendations. And so you're getting our professional planning recommendations to expand what we now have, but not include mobile homes.
So I just have a follow-up question to that. So I know in the recent past as well as currently, we have some winterized mobile homes in the rural area that are there or have been there by the use of a temporary use bylaw. Is that still in effect, or is that something that we're not considering anymore longer?
I'm not aware of the exceptions that have been made as a temporary use. Temporary use is contemplated as up to 3 years and renewable, and so that's not a hard and fast development standard. That's just a temporary permission. We think the municipality of Port Hope would best be served by having more permanent founded housing that fits in with existing communities in a sensitive way.
Okay, so I will then go on. I think any other questions remember, this is not time for opinion, but questions. We'll have opinions that will come later in Committee of the Whole. So just any other questions regarding this particular topic? Mayor Hanksy.
Keeps flipping on and off. Just a follow-up to you, Leo. You had mentioned that there's experimentation happening in other communities. Can you please elaborate on that so that we have that information at the table?
We understand from Kingston that they're doing some experimenting with mobile homes. We would like an opportunity to see what the uptake is. We're not aware of the uptake. I don't think there's much uptake, and we'd like to see how that pans out over the next 5-8 years kind of thing, and see what their experience is. But we're not recommending that Port Hope go into that kind of experimental housing approach.
And one more follow-up question.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So in terms of looking at the experimentation that's going on in Kingston and what you said about there being different planning standards for mobile homes, how is it that Kingston came to the place of being open to experimenting, and what are the impediments in the different planning standards that would prevent us from moving forward with including mobile homes?
Well, typically, mobile homes needed to be situated on deep lots and on their own, and not in a backyard of a residential unit in the downtown or Heritage District or some of the other neighborhoods. They require extensive, they need servicing, they need founding, and so we aren't recommending it. I'm not really clear. I've attended a seminar on Kingston's approach, and they didn't really talk about mobile homes, and I think it's still really early days, and I think that kind of housing should be approached with caution and see how that experiment works out.
Thank you. So my follow-up comment, I guess, is where my thoughts were going on this is that in the rural area, a lot of the farm housing is mobile homes. They have the space in the rural area for those, and they're tied into whatever services they need to be tied into. So that was where my thought process was, and I understand what you're saying about in town. Some of the lots do not fit a full-size mobile home, but certainly there's lots in the rural area that have more than enough space for that. Any other comments regarding this topic? Otherwise, we'll go to Councillor Todd on a new topic.
Thank you. And my next question, and I'm actually looking at it and listening to other questions and thinking there's probably a bit of a theme here, so I may change it a bit. I was going to ask about, because Section 4.4 explicitly permits tiny homes and modular houses as a primary dwelling, subject to the OBC. And my question was going to be, could mobile homes? So now we've talked about that, but then there's all the other stuff, container homes and so on. So I'm wondering, why don't we just say any dwelling that's subject to the OBC? Because if it passes the OBC, we should be good. Why tie us down to that?
Yeah, through the chair, that's a good point, and that's something that we can consider moving forward. That innovative provision, as we've been calling it, it explicitly permits modular homes and tiny homes being defined terms in our zoning bylaw. So the intent of that provision, as it is right now, is to explicitly permit those two dwelling types and not others, but that is something we can consider.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this is more directed at Leo. We've recently passed our strategic plan, and so appreciating the fact that in it literally says remove the barriers and facilitate housing of all kinds. Innovation is a big part of this, and I'm wondering whether or not, appreciating you were studying one town in Ontario, I think we have the opportunity to remove those barriers. This council had already declared housing as a human right. We have a intermunicipal task force on housing and homelessness with a report with recommendations on how we can solve some of these things. Not to mention the will of council that, Councillor Clare has already declared. I would say the forward momentum is clear. So I would strongly suggest back to staff that we need to investigate this deeper and come back with things that are more in line with where council is.
Thank you, Councillor Clare.
I'm going to pick up right where Councillor Todd left off. He kind of took the words right out of my mouth with regards to the wording in our strategic plan of removing barriers, not reducing barriers. And so I'm going to pick up on that comment about the Ontario Building Code and ask, of all of the restrictions, I appreciate that we are reducing these restrictions, sort of allowing more height, allowing an extra bedroom, these sorts of things, but we're still proposing to keep barriers in our zoning bylaw. And so my question is, given that we have set a goal of removing barriers altogether, and in the spirit of the original council motion, are there any restrictions, any of these provisions that restrict ARUs in any way that are stemming from provincial policy, as in we must maintain those provisions? And if not, or for those that are not mandated by the province, is there any good reason why we could not simply remove those altogether and say, if a dwelling unit as an ARU meets the other zoning provisions, it meets the maximum lot coverage, it meets the setback requirements, it meets the maximum heights for that zone, it is permitted? As in, can we just stick to those basics as required by provincial policy and not put any further restrictions on ARUs altogether?
Maybe I could comment, and maybe Ken has a follow-up, but in building communities, Port Hope has a very amazing and unique set of characteristics, and adding additional units to meet the housing crisis and demand that we're facing should have regard for the existing context of the community and the vernacular of the housing styles and that kind of thing. I would suggest that council not go as far as anything goes as long as it meets the building code. I think it has to fit in to the community and be an asset to the community. And that's really, I think, the urban design and community character issue. If any kind of housing is allowed that meets the minimum building code, you may not be very happy with the result in a cumulative sense. That's my caution.
So can I just clarify? My question wasn't about meeting the building code. I think that was Councillor Todd's question. My question was about, are there any provisions that we are including that restrict ARUs in terms of size, lot coverage, setbacks, height, that are not required by the province that we could consider removing altogether, so that we are fulfilling that goal of removing barriers as opposed to editing or slightly reducing those barriers?
So I'm going to turn it over to Ken, but this bylaw is selective and being careful about the kind of infill development that will take place in the urban fabric of Port Hope and even the rural communities. And so there are some restrictions, the floor area, the heights, all those things are part of it. That's not proscribed in the provincial legislation. That has to be colored in with the local needs and consistency with the community. ARUs, in my view, should be an asset and provide additional units, and and we ought to be careful about how we invite them into the community. And Ken, the question on the provincial standards?
Yeah, through the chairs, my understanding through going through the OREGs or Ontario regulations for additional residential unit development, the only thing that really would apply to Port Hope is a lot coverage provision. I believe it's up to 45% of a lot. Aside from that, I'm not aware of any zoning provisions that the province has implemented.
Okay, thank you for that. And moving on, is there any more questions? On this? Or no, on a new topic. I think it's your turn. Yes.
So moving along with another line of questioning, and that's around severances. My question is, could we get more information, or has it been contemplated what might happen to a larger size lot with say the maximum number of ARUs separate from the main building, are there provisions in place to either allow or prevent severances of that property? And what might that look like for people who are wondering?
Yeah, so I'll start off by answering that question saying the intent of developing ARUs is to be accessory to that primary dwelling on the property. They're not intended to be severed off. It's not what the policies are for. However, there are policies that could interfere with severing off additional residential units on a property, most notably prime agricultural lands have very strict new law creation, residential law creation policies, which would actually interfere with the severing off of additional residential units. So there are considerations like that that we would need to consider if someone came forward to do so.
And there may be, if I may, Madam Mayor, there may be some technical severances for long-term mortgages and that kind of thing, but ARUs are supposed to share the lot on which the principal building is on. Is subject to the minimum lot frontage in areas of your zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Adam, did you have another question?
Thank you. So I have an interesting question for you, and this isn't my opinion. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just asking the question. So in the planning for hamlet commercial, you're allowed to have an ARU for a commercial hamlet. Is that not correct? Is that also possible outside of a hamlet for commercial?
So I think what you're referring to is an accessory dwelling unit, which is actually different than an additional residential unit. That in that instance, it's accessory to the commercial use on that property. So we do have separate zoning provisions for accessory dwelling units and commercial zones, whereas ARUs are permitted in residential zones. So two very different considerations. Yeah.
Okay, so my next question is regarding the height. So I think that adding that height is good, especially when it comes to a garage with the apartment above it. So I have a few questions though. Would the language make it clear that it is not the 7.5 on top of the garage, that it's inclusive of the garage?
Yes, so when we read those provisions as planners, it's clear to us that it is the entirety of the garage, is not in addition to anything else. That's something as planners, when we read that, it's a second nature to us. So we could change the language to make it a little bit more explicit, but if Theo or I read it, we understand that, but maybe we can make that more clear and something we can consider moving forward.
Okay, and just a couple other questions about the height. So sort of going a little bit on what Leo had said before, was there any discussion about limiting the height so that it is not higher than the existing dwelling, so it still fits in the community? And then a second part to that question is that I remember we had a variance that came once because a garage pitch roof was too high. So has there been discussion about allowing an exception to the height if it doesn't exceed the primary dwelling, so they don't have to have a variance if a pitch goes over that 7.5 meters?
So regarding the pitch, I do believe we measure height from to the middle, to the average of the roof, from the eaves to the top of the roof, so it's in the middle. That is how our zoning bylaw applies height provisions. And regarding matching the primary dwelling unit, that's an interesting consideration, and I can't recall if we've got into that, and I'm actually not even sure if our provision provides that relief, the greater of. That's something I'm going to have to look into, and maybe I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, and I don't have a particular community in mind, but we could have a development at some point that are all one stories, and then if we allow something that doesn't fit, in that way, being too high might not fit, and then being able to, go high if every building in that neighborhood is quite high and exceeding that by a little bit, if it fits in the community. I would hate someone to have to go through the whole process of a variance or anything like that, just to go over a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can note that. Thank you.
Any other questions from this side? Councillor Clare?
I have a question about the 70-meter square maximum size requirement for a separate building, ARU. And I noted that that is unchanged from the original language that it already exists, but we are now proposing to allow up to 3 bedrooms. So I did a little test of that through the Ontario Building Code, and if you add up all of the minimum room size requirements in the Ontario Building Code, theoretically, you can fit 3 bedrooms and still be within the 70 meters squared, which is about 750 square feet. So not a lot of space. But I did run it through 2 floor plan builders, and neither were able to come up with a floor plan that actually functioned with 3 bedrooms within that constraint. So, when I think of how people develop ARUs, for the most part, people are not doing custom designed work. They're looking at prefab options that they buy from a catalog. So I'm a little concerned that maintaining the 70 meters squared may not actually allow for 3 bedrooms. So I wondered if we could consider increasing that size so that 3 bedrooms actually becomes viable, if in fact we end up keeping any size restrictions at all, since they're not required.
And that's an excellent point, and that is one of the reasons why I'm anxiously waiting our chief building official's comments on these provisions, because we want to have a building professional provide their input, because we're just planners, we look at provisions and they're knowledgeable in building. So that's something we're looking forward to getting comments on. Thank you.
And just a follow-up comment to that, my next question was going to be along that lines of, was there any consideration of maximum bedroom floor coverage? Because potentially we could have 3 bedrooms and a bathroom and no living space, potentially? It wouldn't? No, okay. Okay, and Mayor Henkesi.
Okay, moving a little bit off of that, but I think what you were asking, Councillor Clare, was back to my area around, back to my question around whether we can have maximum flexibility in terms of what we're setting out for floor areas and maximums. I mean, it'd be nice to just give ourselves all the flexibility so that when changes come to the OPG that we don't have to go back and do a lot of housekeeping. But my next question is related, so it's a bit twofold, but related. First is, and maybe this is not necessarily a question to you, but maybe to the CAO and other staff, is how can we as a municipality incentivize ARUs in this community? I know the county does provide some funding for this, but I know that other municipalities are head and shoulders above us in terms of incentives that are being offered to residents. And in particular, I'm thinking about OPG money for growth readiness in the future. Can we make a case for setting aside a significant amount of money to really truly incentivize this form of build in the community? And then how would we then raise awareness and do education around that to the public to really get some momentum happening?
Through the chair, excellent question. We've had those discussions internally as we look for resourcing to help grow this community, make this community ready, growth ready, as I call it, with OPG. It's not quite on the radar yet, from that funding. I think we really need to look at CIPs, those community improvement plans, programs that we have. We have a small one, but it's more for downtown heritage BIA type of district, but definitely want to explore that as we look for funding from OPG to help accommodate the growth. The expectation of 12 to 15,000 potential new residents in Port Hope as we move towards construction phase. So we are exploring that. I think once we have landed that, there is a program, a communication program protocol that we could follow to roll that out definitely to the community. We've estimated something in the substantive size of probably $500,000 to $1 million annually to support that kind of initiative. That's just a ballpark figure. But I think we're a bit early in the stages of our growth readiness we can't fund it off the tax levy. I think that's a huge cost to the taxpayers, but we're definitely exploring that.
And just as a quick follow-up, could we make sure that that's a KPI in our strategic plan?
For sure, we can add it as a metric under there. And to probably not for 2026, but the outer years, 27, 28, for sure.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question or comment to the KPI question. In doing my research before this meeting, I had read that there are communities that have goals for the number of ARUs built within their strategic plan, so X many by this year. Has there been any thought to having a specific number that we can achieve?
A great question, Chair. Now that we've landed the strategic plan and we have multiple initiatives within the strategic plan, we're starting to build the metrics, those measurement metrics to solidify or, to measure our performance against. So yes, we will be working on those metrics, and we would probably make a suggestion what that could look like as well. And I'll deflect to, I think Leo has a comment.
Yes, some municipalities are providing up, achieving some funding, accelerator funding. 25,000 a unit seems to be a number that works well in terms of incentivizing ARUs. ARUs, you need to put in the services, the water and the sewer and the electrical, and do the foundations, that kind of thing. But somewhere in that area is what's needed. But when we get into the growth readiness mode, we should seek external funding and then dole that out as part of the incentive program for ARUs, and then promoting it, of course, through our communications and website and our training programs.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Less with another question or comment.
Yeah, what's the current demand for these?
For additional residential units. So in the staff report, I did list the amount of ARUs that have been developed over the past 3 years, I believe, and approximately 10 units were constructed and granted occupancy over the past 3 years. We do regularly talk with people about additional residential units in the planning department. There is a lot of interest. Sometimes it just doesn't come into fruition. Not really quite sure what happens to some projects that are pursued and come in from time to time.
Thank you.
And Mayor Hinkisby.
I think, though, to be fair, that once you do a more systematic job of raising awareness and providing opportunities and bringing it into mainstream discourse, that we could very well see that in the demand increase. And if there's realistic incentives that make sense to folks, that could definitely tip things into seeing higher numbers.
Councillor Adam.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on that and what you had just said too. You say that there are other people that are, so you said about 10 in the last 3 years, and there are others that have come up. So what is that barrier that is stopping them from pursuing?
I can't say for certain. I'm sure it's a large range of reasons, but namely, it's quite expensive to develop additional residential units, and we do think that is a common factor, a common restraint.
Councillor Clare.
Yeah, last question, I promise, about size. But there are sort of layers, right? There's the provincially mandated, not more than 45%, and then we have the 10% lot coverage and 5% lot coverage. We have these percentage-based lot coverages, and then we have this maximum size that we will allow no matter the size of the lot. And sort of picking up on Leo's comment about the character of our neighborhoods, the thing about Port Hope is that our neighborhoods are quite unique, and there's a lot of very unique properties. So I'm wondering whether if we're going to have restrictions, sticking to the percentage-based model might actually provide us that flexibility that the mayor keeps talking about to be in line with the character of that existing property or neighborhood. There are many properties in the urban area that are a full acre or multiple acres that have one house on it that covers, 2% of that property and could have a full-size home, for a family as an ARU without even coming close to reaching the provincial maximums in terms of lot coverage. So wondering if we could think, if we're going to have restrictions, could we keep them percentage-based so that they're flexible in how they're applied and in a way that's appropriate to each individual property so we can maintain that character, but also facilitate as much housing and as many beds, I guess, in our community as possible.
Yeah, that is something we can look into. It's developing ARUs, is like you said, is case by case basis, by neighborhood by neighborhood. Can be challenging to get into those details, but it's certainly something we can look into.
Thank you. So I have one other question, and something I didn't see here. In the rural area, the requirement to tie into the septic, is that a provincial requirement? Or is there options? And I think that's why many rural ARUs don't get built, because it's quite costly, because it would require pretty much the septic to be replaced. But there's other alternatives. So is that a requirement from the province that they must tie into the existing septic?
Through the chair, I'm still on. You know, when we brought back in 2022, we said that the provincial policies didn't talk at all about the rural area. They focused on the urban area, but we felt it was important for us. And that's why at the time, by way of a context and background, we suggested one, and it was yours, and the other councillor that wanted two, and we have two. So you know, it's pretty silent in the province in the rural area, and for that reason as well, we have noticed over the year that the septic can be a problem because they can be really old. That's why we didn't put any restriction on the septic. We've said, well, but septic, we allow one. So we're trying to remove that barrier, and, you know, so, but we can still consider any suggestion that you may have.
Sorry, thank you. Any other questions from council? No? Okay. Well, I think that was a lot of good discussion, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion probably when it comes back to committee of the whole, but I think you've got a lot of information at this point. So before we begin submissions from the public, I'd like to note that the staff report outlines changes to the Planning Act that have changed the public's ability to appeal a decision on zoning bylaw amendment applications to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Only the applicant, a specified person as defined by the Planning Act, a public body as defined by the Planning Act, and a registered owner of the land to which the bylaw would apply has the ability to appeal the eventual decision of the municipality of Port Hope to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This means that residents' appeal rights for zoning bylaw amendments have been removed by the province. Members of the public may provide comments or questions related to this application tonight or any time prior to a decision being made by council. Please email planning@porthope.ca to provide your comments to staff if you do not provide them tonight. All those who wish to speak to this matter tonight should approach the microphone and clearly state your name and address for the record, please. I also want to remind those of you in attendance, but especially those looking to speak this evening, please ensure that you complete the sign-in sheet near the entrance before you leave. The sheets assist municipal staff as it provides a record of attendance and contact information if a notice of decision is requested. And I think we're all still good to go. We don't need a recess or anything, so I will ask anybody from the public to please come up if you have a comment.
Good evening. My name is Shane Watson. I live at 33 Freeman Drive. Is there a constraint I have on time tonight? Within reason?
Well, there is none, but yeah, within reason.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I'd just like to say that I think the movement and flexibility that is being presented here is appreciated. But I would also echo some of the comments I've heard from councillors tonight about can we truly live into the spirit of what I hear when I look at the strategic plan and the idea of not just lowering barriers, but removing them. And I note that part, that statement about removing barriers around housing is under the inclusion portion of the strategic plan. And so, you know, hearing some of the conversation about mobile homes and other types of homes and the character, I don't want to repeat the comments that have already been made, but, you know, part of what makes Port Hope unique is a little bit of variety in what we've gotten, which is probably developed at a time when there were fewer restrictions on what you could build. So I would certainly, as a member of the community, support the idea that we want to have quality housing. We don't want to have poor quality housing, but we should expand our minds in terms of what that quality housing might look like, both in terms of size and composition. One of the things that I'd like to just provide as an overarching comment, and it I think addresses some of the discussion I heard earlier tonight, was about, why are people not proceeding with applications? There's lots of conversation about some of this in terms of ARUs and whatnot, but I think one of the things I'd like to have considered is to look at this from the perspective of a homeowner who is trying to develop an ARU, whether that be because they're trying to find a spot for their mother-in-law, or they're trying to develop an opportunity to generate a little bit of income by providing an affordable place for somebody to live in their backyard. As has been noted, the cost for the initial development to install sewer and water and things like that from the main dwelling to this property is a certain sizable investment. I guess maybe this is a comment and perhaps also a question. Do these changes would that allow me as a homeowner to construct 2 ARUs as a detached structure in my backyard? If it doesn't, then that's one of the things I would ask for flexibility on, even if there's a restriction on bedrooms, because for me as a homeowner, if I were able to have, a single structure that had a 2-bedroom unit and a 1-bedroom unit, then that could make it more financially viable for me, because I've got 2 units that I could rent out. The other comment I'd like to make is that the last time I looked at the county's report on housing, one of the underserved demographics was single people. And so creating opportunities to create dwellings that are affordable for a single person or a single senior especially, I think is something that I would encourage you to think about. And so that idea of having, does it really matter if I have a certain size structure and it's 2 units or 1 unit, if we're talking about the same number of people? So 2 people in 2 units in my backyard, is that any different than 3 people in 1 unit? What are we trying to control here with the limits on the number of bedrooms or the number of dwelling units that are permitted in a detached structure? So from my perspective, that's one of the things that's holding me back a little bit in terms of developing this on my property, is just, trying to get over some of the financial considerations. Just another overarching comment perhaps is just with respect to the timeline. The strategic plan has got a expiry date on it. I know we'll develop another strategic plan, but I think the spirit of the plan is that, I assume when council approved that we're trying to actually work towards these objectives within the 3-year time frame that's outlined in the plan. And so I would like to encourage some sense of urgency around some of the changes that we're talking about. I think there's nothing that's more discouraging for community members, for any change makers in our community, than to hear that there's a change coming, but it's so far out on the horizon that you really can't imagine it. And so I would just encourage some urgency over the timeline in terms of meeting the spirit of the strategic plan. A couple more technical comments. Don't let the caller confuse you. I'm also an engineer. With respect to the height, I can imagine situations, where definitely there would be a desire to control the height of new structures that are being developed. But I think it would also be useful to consider the landscape of the particular property in mind. So for example, if you've got a property with a significant grade change across the backyard, then does it matter if the structure you're building in the backyard is taller than your main dwelling unit A, if you can't see it from the street, or B, if it doesn't end up being any higher in elevation than the main dwelling unit. In my neighborhood, I have a single, I live in a bungalow, so single story. You know, next to me, there's a 2-story house. Across the street from me, there's a 2-story house. So I assume that if I wanted to apply for a building permit to put a second story on my structure, that would be allowed. I wouldn't want to have to go through that loophole to put a second story on my house so that I could build a slightly taller structure in my backyard. So again, I would just encourage people to think about what is it that we're really trying to control, and is it necessary for us to control it? I echo some of the comments that have been made about, you know, where can we line up with the building code? So for example, with the number of bedrooms, the building code is going to require certain minimum areas for building code, for bedrooms, certain areas for all the different parts of a house. And so if we're controlling the size of the structure, which I would encourage more flexibility about that, but if we're somehow controlling ultimately the size of a structure that's being constructed, is it really necessary for us to also control the number of bedrooms? Ultimately, that's going to be governed by the size requirements that are provided in the building code. One last comment is just with respect to the portability of housing. And this is not a situation that I'm in, but I can imagine that if I was in a situation where I was looking at a portable type house, not necessarily mobile home, but a home that if I wanted to put the effort into it one day, I could relocate somewhere else. There's not a lot of those out there in the community. If I had made the investment to procure something like that, and you know my job required me to move elsewhere, financially it might be really advantageous for me to be able to take that with me, as opposed to try and purchase something like that elsewhere or to try and recreate it elsewhere. So there's lots of us who might have difficulty imagining why I might want to move a dwelling. But when we talk about these really small structures and the financial situation of people who may be moving into them, I think the consideration about, you know, what happens if I need to relocate, or what happens if something happens that I need to kind of replicate that somewhere else. So I appreciate the opportunity to comment tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Sure. Next person come up, state your name and your address, please.
My name is Max Lamarchand. I live in Cobourg, but I'm an active builder in this area, and we actually build tiny homes and ADUs. So I'm really interested in what you're talking about here, and really commend the council for your forward thinking on this, because it's really important. ADUs were originally put forward in Ontario in about 1994, and then they tried to get them going, didn't get going. 2011, they put them forward as a the province mandated that ADUs were to be provided for. This is 2025, and you've built 10 of them, right? So it hasn't been a big rush to get these things done, and there are reasons for that. And the reasons for that, from our experience, is the complications. Immediately when they were said to be provided for, they weren't provided for. There was all sorts of regulations that were, you know, filtered in. Well, you can have one, but you need this and that and the other thing, to make it very impractical to do. So it's really encouraging to hear the councillors and the mayor here. You've identified that, you see it, and you understand what's going on. Since 1994, that is 31 years, the housing crisis has escalated exponentially during that period and continuing to go. And basically, we're continually doing the same thing with these regulations. Oh, well, we don't want that. No, do you really want this, and do you really want that? So the councillor that said that we should be reducing these regulations as much as possible, I think is totally the right idea. With respect to heights and whether they have wheels or they don't have wheels, heights one hand, the planning profession is saying we should have, 40, 60, 80-story buildings, but definitely very high buildings in many locations. But on the other hand, they're going to regulate that it's going to be 7.5 meter height which is not enough for 3 stories. And many homes are 3 stories. So for the height, I would definitely recommend to you that basically you allow enough height so people can have enough innovation to build what they need to build. We have a 3-story ADU that we've developed, and can I fit it in 7.5 meter height? I probably can, but then you're squishing the rooms down. Why do you want to do that? Mobility, tiny homes are, there's all this confusion. It's a tiny home, it's a mobile home, it's a manufactured home, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And there's the more confusion that you get on that, the more complication is to do anything. And there is entrenched prejudice towards mobile homes. So trailers, people don't want trailers. They want to zone against trailers. It's indoctrinated into everything to do that. Mobile tiny homes are important, and many tiny homes are mobile. Innovation. Now the mobile tiny homes are built to house standards. So they're quality built, year-round structures in many cases, but they're mobile. And it's very important they're mobile. For the gentleman before me mentioning, people have requirements now to move, or you may need to accommodate a relative for some small period of time, and then you don't on that. With a mobile structure, you can move that structure, you can sell that structure, you can have the flexibility to experiment a little bit with an accessory dwelling unit without going to, putting in foundations and everything else like that. And there's absolutely no difference other than it is mobile and on wheels. Basically you could have a ugly, shoddily constructed tiny home that looks like a aluminum trailer, if you so want to build it. Construction techniques shouldn't be the confining or defining criteria. Although, they're a consideration. But that shouldn't be the defining criteria, and there's no reason, or I would highly recommend and encourage that you look at tiny homes that are on wheels and providing for them, because they're a very important component of that type of housing, and it's something that may open up if wheeled tiny homes are permitted. You're going to see those ADUs be taken up on a little bit faster, I think, than you will if they have to be fixed units. And it also gives the owner the flexibility. They may want to have somebody there for a period of time, a child, an elderly spouse, and then in 5 years, they're not there. They may wish to sell that unit. So it's important flexibility. So I guess to summarize, thank you so much. So encouraging what you're doing. Really is, I think, at the forefront, even though it is years and years. Many municipalities are struggling with the same thing, where they just keep regulating and killing it by, 1,000 cuts. And, from what I hear from you, you're onto that and you've got it zoned in. So I would ask, definitely consider wheels because they're important. The height, look at the height, and basically, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For those comments as well. And we have next person. And again, state your name and your address. No, you're up.
Chris Wallace on Walton Street. A couple of technical questions first. The 70 square meter, is that according to the building code definition of building area, or is that the zoning bylaw definition of gross floor area? Over a 2-story building, one is double the other. We got to be clear.
it's my understanding that 70 square meters was identified as appropriate when these zoning permissions came into place. I cannot confirm if it has anything to do with Ontario Building Code regulations, but that's what, yeah.
A building code is total footprint of the building regardless of how many stories are up above it. So if we go by that definition, a second story could be an additional 70 square meters. 2 stories by the gross floor area definition, it's 35 square meters plus 35. So it's really a huge difference. It should be clarified. Height, your sketch illustrations of the 5 meter and 7.5 meter implied that they were 2-story and 3-story. Are you presuming any story limitations? Because 3 stories at 7.5 meters, as I understand it, height is measured to halfway up the roof slope. You could just barely squeeze in 3 stories by that definition. So a flat roof structure, it's simply not possible. So again, it should be clear whether we work it in such a way that 3 stories are possible. I can't imagine too many tiny homes going to 3-story, but again, we want to understand what the options are.
Sorry, can I just, I think public asking staff the questions, if we could have more comments, and then if you have questions, write the questions to staff so they have time to answer those questions.
Okay, fair enough. Comment. The absolutely amazing opportunity for ARUs and tiny homes are the back lanes, particularly the ones parallel to Rideout Street, north and south of Rideout Street. Now, these logically would have access, vehicular and pedestrian, off the back lane rather than the primary street. Would there be any special provisions in the bylaw that make a back lane ARU any different than anything else, or does exactly the same set of rules apply?
Well, I can't answer that question for you now, but it is noted, so
Yeah.
that will be taken into consideration.
Yeah. Some municipalities, mostly larger ones, when there have been a lot of back lane houses, they've actually converted the back lane to a public road and run utilities down it. Am I correct in assuming that that's not likely to ever happen here?
Again, I can't assume that it's going to happen. It's, I mean.
So a back lane house or coach house with a flat over garages below would run its utility connections through to the primary street frontage.
Yeah, that's a good question. So all these questions cannot be necessarily answered tonight, but they are being noted. So I'm sorry that I can't answer it, but good question.
Yeah. One last back lane comment. Accessory dwellings, tiny homes on the commercial downtown core back lanes, Brewery Lane, Brogdon's Lane. Is there any prohibition? Because quite frankly, the downtown core, because of its higher density, presents some amazing opportunities, challenges, but some really neat opportunities. Anyway, something to think about.
Thank you. Always very innovative thought process. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the public? No. Oh, another one? Sorry, can you come up to the mic?
The other point I left out is the encouragement to add, so the province came out with the encouragement, or actually the directive in 211 for ADUs. 222, they increased that and they said, now we don't only want you to have one ADU, we want you to have possibly 2 ADUs. And so obviously the direction is to provide more ADUs and as many as possible. Well, now what I'm hearing all the feedback is that now through the planning documents, it's okay, well, how can we, twist it so that you can't really have 2 or to minimize that to the maximum degree? And I think that's a mistake. The idea is to have as many as possible that fit on the lot because they're trying to intensify and provide housing for people. And this type of housing, even at an intense spaces, is very low density. So if you happen to be sitting on an acre lot, yeah, you can probably accommodate 2 small ADUs. And it's not a big issue. So, but that's exactly what's going on now. It's like, okay, well, how can we make sure that they actually don't get that extra opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's been discussed a few times tonight, so thank you. Another comment?
Jonathan Brown, I'm a citizen of Cobourg, a retired educator. Great opportunity here for innovation. I would encourage you to look at how to support upskilling the local workforce and also tying this into pathways for local youth and for the small and medium-sized businesses that will need to be upskilled to accommodate this kind of circular economy and low-impact development in both Ward 1 and Ward 2, or any community for that matter. And also, to Max's point, the importance of educating our future generation and our existing generation on what it means to dwell in a sustainable way in our communities. And that this is a multi-generational opportunity and a golden one to look at where we're headed with the Wesleyville Initiative, AI, and the backbone of AI, and all of that. So thank you, and all the best in this initiative.
Thank you very much. And I think I see the mayor has a comment or question.
Gosh, I just wanted to thank you for that comment and to say that there are really important developments underway for Port Hope High School that should be accomplishing many of these kinds of goals.
Okay, any other comments from the public? All right, so I think we had a good discussion here tonight, and once again, I want to remind anybody who wants to be consulted to please sign the list, and if there are no other questions, then at this time, I will conclude the public meeting for tonight, and the meeting is adjourned.